There is a practice that has been performed in Jewish homes across the Mediterranean world for over 3,000 years, and almost nobody living today knows it still exists. It does not require anything expensive. It does not require a rabbi standing beside you. It requires one ingredient, an ingredient that appears more times in the Torah, the Talmud, and the Zohar than almost any other food on earth, and a few minutes of your Friday before the sun begins to set. What it can bring into your home is something that no alarm system, no lock, and no modern technology can provide. The tradition calls it divine protection. And after 43 years of studying the spiritual dimension of food and sacred practice, I can tell you that what I am about to share with you is one of the most ancient and most forgotten rituals in the entire Jewish kitchen tradition. My name is Rabbi Shlomo Katz. I was born in Tzfat, Safed, the mountain city in northern Israel that has been the heart of Jewish mysticism for 5 centuries. I studied at the yeshiva of Tzfat and later at Bar Ilan University. But my most important teacher was never a professor or a department head. My most important teacher was my grandfather, Reb Yosef Katz, a master Kabbalist from the school of Tzfat, who began teaching me before I could read, teaching me that every food Hashem placed on this earth carries a code, a spiritual signature, and that code, when you know how to use it, can heal, can protect, and can draw blessing into your life and your home. What I am sharing today is one of the 7, one of the Shabbat Haminim, the 7 sacred foods of Israel listed in Deuteronomy, chapter 8, verse 8. These 7 foods are not simply agricultural products. They are what my grandfather called the divine blueprint of the Jewish kitchen, and today's practice is built around the most luminous of them all. Toward the end of this teaching, I will share something that my grandfather only revealed to family. A specific intention, he said, must be held in the heart during this Friday ritual for it to carry its full protective power. Do not skip ahead. The intention without the understanding will not work. Stay with me through this entire teaching, and by the end you will know something very few people in the world still practice. If you feel that your home needs more protection, more peace, more of a shield against the difficulties of this world, write the words Shabbat Haminim in the comments below. It tells me you are here. It tells me you are ready. I want to tell you where I first learned this ritual, because the place matters. In Tzfat, the houses are built from stone that is hundreds of years old. The alleyways are narrow, and they curve in ways that feel intentional, as if the city itself was designed to slow you down, to make you stop and pay attention. My grandfather's kitchen had 2 small windows that faced west, toward the sea you could not quite see but always felt. On Friday afternoons, the light that came through those windows was not ordinary light. It was thick, almost golden, the way light looks when it knows the Shabbat is coming. Every Friday, before my grandmother lit the candles, before the table was set, before anything, my grandfather would take a small clay dish, pour a careful measure of olive oil into it, and walk to the front door. He would stand there for several minutes. He never rushed this. When he came back to the kitchen, his face was different, calmer, more settled. As a child, I thought he was simply doing something practical, oiling the hinges, perhaps. It was not until I was in my late teens and studying in the yeshiva that I asked him directly what he was doing. He sat down across from me at the table, and he looked at me the way he only looked at me when he was about to say something he had been waiting to say for a long time. He told me that the olive oil was not just oil. He told me that in the Zohar, the great text of Jewish mysticism compiled in 13th century Spain, but carrying traditions that trace back to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the 2nd century, olive oil is described as the carrier of or, divine light. That the oil does not just burn, It holds. It preserves. It sanctifies whatever it touches. And that when you bring it to the threshold of your home on Erev Shabbat, the eve of the Sabbath, being with full intention and the right blessing, you are not performing a superstition. You are performing a tikkun, a repair and an elevation of the spiritual boundary of your home. He also told me something I have thought about many times since. He said that most rabbis in the modern world do not teach this publicly, not because it is forbidden, but because so much of what was practiced in the home, the kitchen practices, the threshold rituals, the Friday preparations, was considered the domain of women and grandmothers, and was passed down through the hands and not through books. When the great disruptions of the 20th century came, the wars, the migrations, the losses, much of what lived in the hands was lost. It did not make it into the formal curriculum. And so, an entire dimension of Jewish sacred practice simply became invisible. That is why I am here. That is why this channel exists. If you have ever felt that your home needed more protection, more light, more of a boundary between itself and the difficulties of the world, this is not a feeling you should dismiss. The tradition teaches that this feeling is itself a form of wisdom. Now let me speak honestly about why this matters today, because I do not want to live in a world that does not acknowledge its own difficulties. We are living through a time of extraordinary anxiety. The disruptions in the global economy over the past several years have left families uncertain in ways that go far beyond money. Studies published in 2024 by the American Psychological Association showed that anxiety about safety and security in the home is at levels not recorded since the early years of the pandemic. People are locking their doors and still not feeling protected. They are installing systems, cameras, devices, and still lying awake at night with a low-level fear they cannot name or locate. I understand this because I have lived through versions of it myself. There was a period in my early 40s not long after I moved to the United States when I was building a new life here in Florida and I was moving too fast. I was teaching, I was writing, I was traveling to give classes, and somewhere in the speed I dropped the Friday practices. Not deliberately, not as a decision. I simply forgot to slow down on Friday afternoon. I forgot to stand at the door. And I can tell you without any drama that over the following 2 years, my home felt different. There was a quality of restlessness in it that I had not felt before. Arguments that seemed to come from nowhere. A sense that the boundary between my family and the chaos of the world was thinner than it should have been. When I returned to the practice, when I picked up the clay dish again on a Friday afternoon and stood at my door in Boca Raton with the same intention my grandfather had taught me, the change was not dramatic. It was quiet. But it was real. The sense of boundary returned. The restlessness eased. What the modern world offers us against insecurity and fear are things that exist entirely on the physical level. Locks, systems, insurance policies, financial products. These are not worthless, but they address only one dimension of a home. The tradition teaches that a home exists on multiple dimensions simultaneously, physical, emotional, and spiritual, and that the spiritual dimension of a home's boundary is at least as important as its physical one. What secular culture has lost is any language or practice for addressing that spiritual dimension. That is the gap this ritual is designed to fill. And what I discovered after decades of study is that this practice is not an isolated custom. It belongs to a complete system, a system of 7 sacred foods, and the practices built around them that work together as a unified code. Today, I am sharing one of these 7. But the tradition teaches that each becomes more powerful when practiced alongside the others. My grandfather did not teach these 7 foods as separate items. He taught them as a complete system, each one unlocking something in the others. The food at the center of this practice is olive oil, shemen zayit, the oil of the olive. The olive itself is one of the Shabbat shemenim, the 7 sacred foods of Israel, listed explicitly in Deuteronomy 8:8. The olive tree is also the oldest cultivated tree in the land of Israel, with groves in the Galilee that are documented to be over 2,000 years old. In Tractate Menashot of the Talmud, chapter 8, the rabbis discuss in careful detail which grade of olive oil is required for the menorah of the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, and conclude that only the first pressing, the purest oil drawn before any heat or pressure is applied, carries the full sanctity required. This is not incidental. The Talmud is teaching us something about the nature of olive oil itself, that at its purest, it's not simply a food or a fuel. It's a carrier of sacred light. The Zohar goes further. In the section known as terumah, the Zohar describes olive oil as a substance that belongs simultaneously to the physical world and to the world of Or Ein Sof, the infinite divine light. It says that the oil does not create light. It releases light that was already hidden within it. This is a profound statement. It means that when you anoint something with olive oil, a door, a mezuzah, a threshold, you are not adding something foreign to that place. You are releasing something that was already present, but sleeping. The doorpost, of course, is not an arbitrary location for this practice. The mezuzah, the sacred parchment containing the Shema that Jewish families affix to their doorposts, is one of the most ancient expressions of Jewish home spirituality. Its commandment comes from Deuteronomy 6:9. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. The door is the threshold. It is the point of transition between the outside world and the interior world of the family. In Kabbalistic teaching, as explained in the Tanya, the foundational text of Shabbat Hasidism, written by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the doorpost represents the boundary between the realm of the klippah, the husks or shells that can carry spiritual interference, and the sanctified interior space of the Jewish home. The mezuzah guards this boundary, and the olive oil, the tradition teaches, anoints and strengthens it. Friday is the correct day for this practice for a specific reason. In the Jewish calendar, Friday is the 6th day, Yom Shishi, the day of preparation for Shabbat. In Kabbalistic teaching, the 6th day corresponds to the Sephirah of Yesod, the foundation, which serves as the channel through which blessing flows from the higher spiritual worlds into the physical world. When you perform this anointing on Friday, before Shabbat enters, you are working with the natural spiritual current of the day rather than against it. You are, as my grandfather used to say, placing your vessel where the rain is already falling. Now I will teach you the practice itself. You will need extra virgin olive oil, the first cold press if you can find it. This is not a requirement born of expense or status. It is the same standard the Talmud applied to the temple. Purity matters because intention travels through the substance. You will also need a small dish or bowl. Clay or ceramic is traditional, though any clean vessel is acceptable. You will need a few minutes of quiet. Not silence necessarily, but the quality of attention that comes when you decide that what you are doing is important. The practice begins before sunset on Friday, ideally in the late afternoon when the light is changing. In the tradition of Tzfat, this transitional light of Friday afternoon was considered a time of particular spiritual openness. a moment when the boundary between ordinary time and sacred time is thin. Begin by washing your hands. This is not merely hygienic. In the tradition, washing the hands before a sacred act is called netalat yadayim, and it signals to the body and the mind that what follows is different in quality from what came before. Pour the olive oil into the dish. As you pour it, look at it. My grandfather always said to look at the oil before using it. He said that the oil can see intention the way water can hold memory. Carry the dish to your front door. Stand at the threshold, on the interior side facing the door. Before you touch anything, speak aloud. The words can be in any language, but the tradition prefers Hebrew when it is known. Say the following: Baruch Atas, Adonai Eloheinu, Melech Haolam, Asher Kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to engage with the words of Torah. This blessing is not specific to the oil ritual. It is the blessing one recites when engaging in Torah-based practice. And what you are about to do is precisely that. Then, using the first two fingers of your right hand, dip them into the oil. Apply the oil to the upper part of your door frame, the lintel, the horizontal beam above the door. Apply it on both sides of the door frame as well, the right post and the left post. As you do this, you may recite quietly from Psalm 121, Adonai Yishmor, Tzecha Uvoecha, Me'ata vad olam. The Lord will guard your going and your coming from now and unto eternity. This psalm has been associated with the protection of the home in Jewish tradition for at least 2,000 years. It is not decorative. It is functional. It is what the tradition calls a segulah, a spiritually efficacious practice whose mechanism operates beyond ordinary cause and effect. After you have anointed all three surfaces of the door frame, stand quietly for 1 minute. Do not move. Do not check your phone. Do not think about what needs to be done before dinner. This minute of stillness is, my grandfather told me, the most important part of the entire practice. He said that what the tradition calls shmirat habayit, the divine guardianship of the home, cannot enter a threshold that the owner himself is not present in. You must be there fully for at least 1 minute with a clear and sincere desire in your heart that your home be protected, that your family be guarded, that what passes through this door brings only blessing and leaves behind everything that does not belong inside. This is what my grandfather only revealed to family. It is not the oil that protects. The oil is the vessel. It is the presence, your intention, your sincere and open heart that activates what the oil carries. He told me that the Zohar teaches this directly in the section on Pekudei, that a blessing descends only where there is a human vessel prepared to receive it, and that the preparation of the vessel is itself an act of sacred partnership between the human and the divine. After the minute of stillness, return the dish to your kitchen. The practice is complete. Some families pour the remaining oil into their Shabbat lamp or their olive oil candles. This is a beautiful continuation of the same intention. What should you expect? The tradition does not speak in guarantees. I want to be honest with you about this. What the tradition teaches is that when practiced consistently, every Friday with genuine intention without rushing, this ritual creates what the Kabbalists call a reshimu, an impression, a spiritual marking that accumulates over time. In 24 hours, you may notice simply a quality of quiet in your home that feels slightly different than usual. In 7 weeks, if you have been consistent, you may notice that the quality of what enters your home through that door news, visitors, energy, mood seems lighter. In 40 days, which is the traditional threshold for a practice to take spiritual root, you should begin to feel a relationship with your own threshold, a sense that the boundary of your home is alive and guarded in a way that goes beyond what any physical lock can provide. What the tradition warns against is performing this ritual while in a state of anger or resentment toward anyone in your household. The Talmud, in Tractate Bereshot, teaches that a home where there is unresolved conflict between its members cannot fully receive protection because the boundaries of the home are, spiritually speaking, already breached from within. This is not a reason to delay the practice indefinitely. It is a reason to begin the Friday preparation with reconciliation, with a soft word to a spouse, a patient moment with a child, before standing at the door. Also, do not perform this practice out of fear. Perform it out of trust. Fear is not an intention that olive oil can carry well. Trust is. My grandfather was very specific about this distinction. And do not use refined processed oil for this practice. The processing removes something essential. I cannot explain this in chemical terms. I can only tell you what the Talmud implied in Tractate Menachot and what my grandfather confirmed from decades of observation, that purity of substance and purity of intention work together. Compromise one, and you compromise the other. I wanted to tell you something about our moment in history because this knowledge is not an antique. It is needed now more than it has been needed in a long time. There was a period in my life in my late 50s when I was giving many public teachings and I am sorry to say, somewhat proud of my own knowledge. I traveled to many cities. I gave many lectures. I wrote articles and people praised them. And I realized at some point that I had stopped learning. I had stopped sitting at the table in the student's position and instead was always at the table in the teacher's position. My grandfather, who was still alive at the time, said to me once during a visit, "Shlomo, the oil lamp does not care how many books you have read. It cares only whether there is oil. Go back to the oil." He meant this literally and he meant it as metaphor. I went back to the Friday practice. I went back to the threshold, and something returned. A quality of humility, a quality of openness that I had let dry up. The world today is moving very fast. The speed itself is a form of spiritual exposure. Ancient traditions understood that speed breaks down the membrane between the self and the environment, that without regular practice, a family becomes porous in ways that invite difficulty in without meaning to. This Friday practice is, in part, a practice of slowing down enough to say, I am here. This is my home. I am placing my intentional presence at this threshold. I am asking for partnership with something larger than myself in protecting what I love. My grandfather spent his entire life organizing these 7 teachings into a complete system. It took me decades to understand how deeply they connect, how the olive cannot be fully understood without the fig, how the fig cannot be fully understood without the grape, how each of these 7 sacred foods amplifies the others when they are practiced together as the unified code they were always meant to be. So, let me close by reminding you of what you have received today. You now know that the olive, the oil of the olive, one of the Shivat Haminim, the 7 sacred foods mentioned in Deuteronomy 8:8, carries, in Jewish tradition, a specific spiritual function. It is a carrier of divine light, a substance that releases what is already hidden within it, when it is brought to the right place with the right intention. You now know that the doorframe, the threshold of your home, is not an arbitrary surface. It is the point of transition between outside and inside, between the world of uncertainty and the world of the family, and that Jewish tradition has a complete and sophisticated practice for sanctifying this boundary. You know the practice: the oil, the dish, the anointing of the lintel and the two posts, the recitation of Psalm 121, the 1 minute of presence. And you know the intention that my grandfather kept only for family, that it is not the oil alone that protects. It is the presence, the open heart, the sincere desire for your home to be a place of safety and blessing. And it is these things that turn the oil from a substance into a vessel of divine partnership. This knowledge belongs to you. It does not require you to be a rabbi or a scholar. It requires only that you show up at your own door on Friday afternoon and stand there present, asking. The tradition teaches that this asking is itself a form of faith, and that faith of this kind never goes unanswered. Use this practice with good intention. Use it with gratitude toward the tradition that preserved it through centuries of disruption and loss. Use it with respect toward the text that contains it, and use it with the understanding that knowledge like this comes with responsibility, not just to practice it yourself, but to pass it to the people who live under your roof, and perhaps one day to the children who will live under theirs. In my next teaching, I will reveal another of the 7 sacred foods, one that my grandfather said was the most misunderstood in all of Torah. A food that most families eat without knowing it carries what the Zohar calls the specific frequency of divine abundance. You will not want to miss it. Please subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell so that teaching reaches you when it is ready. If this video brought you something, a memory, a feeling, a recognition, share it with someone you love. Leave a comment. Let me know where in the world you are watching from. This community of people who are hungry for this ancient wisdom, you are not alone in that hunger. None of us are. Shabbat Shalom. Until next time.